artists are therefore very vulnerable, if you like. You're on the front line, that you're the first to get shot at. You know, you get your head above the parapet, you'll get shot at. An artist by nature, you're often out there saying things which the culture may not want to hear. Maybe growing up under the shadow of the Second World War, and with the impact of the First World War on my family, because of my grandfather being on the Battle of the Somme and how that affected him, and therefore affected my mother and her siblings. The idea of the front line, you know, the battle line, is big. And I grew up with a lot of Bible stories and a lot of stories from Greek and Roman history and Greek and Roman mythology and Norse mythology. And so battle lines, you know, which of course is huge in Tolkien, who has influenced, interestingly, a wonderful, truly great writer, great thinker like Tolkien was influenced by similar things, by his Christian Catholic background, by the Bible, by the great myths. He was a great Anglo-Saxon expert on Beowulf and many other things, and so he fed on the idea of battle lines and this thing of the front line, the kind of the most dangerous place to be, and I think for me that has had a kind of moral significance. That I think there are a number of reasons why creative people, why artists tend to be on the front line. One of them, actually, to use a slightly different metaphor, or a very different metaphor, I've sometimes said, you know, artists are the canary in the coal mine, meaning that in the old days, before the invention of the Davy lamp in the early 1820s, in order to test out the levels of methane gas in coal mines, you took a canary in a cage, and if the canary fell off its perch dead, then you cleared out the mine of all the miners. And so the first person, the first creature to go down from the methane is the canary. And the artists are very vulnerable to changes in the economy. So for example, if there's a recession, people stop paying for luxuries. They will stop going to the theatre. They will stop commissioning artistic works. They won't buy painting. There's all this luxury stuff gets shut down. Governments, I mean, last time I was interestingly in America, which was a few years ago, on a theatre tour, I went round a dozen American universities, and almost every single one was shutting down its theatre program. Canary in the coal mine. Difficult financial circumstances for these universities. They had, in one case, I'm thinking of, they had the most beautiful black box theatre. And I was almost literally pleading with the university, don't lose this, don't turn this into some shower cubicles or some coffee lounge or something with whiteboards and projectors. This is precious, imaginative territory. This is frontline stuff. Let your young students explore, use their imaginations, take risks, act for the first time, try a new play. I said, you know, this is what the future should be about, but they still shut it down. And artists are therefore very vulnerable, if you like. You're on the front line, that you're the first to get shot at. You know, you get your head above the parapet, you'll get shot at. And artists by nature, particularly writers and poets and musicians and songwriters and the rest of it, you know, that you're often out there saying things which the culture may not want to hear, or suddenly you find no one wants to commission work from you, because what people want is easy listening. They want comforting things. They just want reassuring comedy. They don't want some disturbing new series or new idea. So the writer is on that sort of front line, where if you remain prophetic and you stay as true to yourself and your own conscience as you can, you may find that you get poor rather than rich. And I've personally known a number of artists, creative artists, usually musicians, who've made a lot of money by working for a mass audience, by appealing to a mass audience. And In other words, there is a category of artists who play safe and they often make money. But the artists who are, take the case of Van Gogh, he never sold a painting really, except I think 3 or to his own brother in his whole lifetime. And now you'd be lucky if you bought a Van Gogh for less than 40 million. I mean, he's one of the most famous defining artists of the last 150 years, but utterly, utterly poor and completely on the front line, both in terms of being able to sell his work, but also in terms of his mental health, which is the other point. The reason why artists are on the front line often is because they're in emotional crisis, that what makes somebody a very good poet or a very good writer or painter is because they're often from dysfunctional homes or they've been very unhappy in childhood. And their sensitivity, which causes them trouble in their life, and they often have unstable relationships. But the very sensitivity and the very wounds that they carry are what makes them wonderful at what they do. So in that sense, they're on a kind of emotional front line. They're wounded people. Somebody once used the phrase, a brilliant phrase, I think it was Fred Beatner, the writer, but about, vulnus in Latin is the word for wound. To be vulnerable is to have woundability. Vulnerability equals woundability. And artists have this profound woundability, which means that they're very sensitive, but they also speak into the culture. So if there's a battle line that's moral and emotional and spiritual, you can be sure that along that front line, there will be activists, there will be brilliant charity workers, there will be people doing wonderful things in social projects, but there will be artists out there. There will be entrepreneurs too, taking risks and sometimes using their money with great philanthropic intention. But the artists frequently will be out there by their very nature, so they are emotionally, financially, and spiritually and artistically vulnerable. But it is this woundability that makes them the right kind of soldiers to be on the front line, men and women. It's a dangerous calling, it's a risk-taking calling, but it's a very high calling in my view. Maybe I'm over-elevating it. There's lots of kind of arts. There's a bit of a mix-up on the question of arts and craft, and there's often a lot of people who are just producing, if you like, craft. That's okay, that's a good calling in itself. But the artists who are really painting differently or singing differently. I mean, I read an obituary of the brilliant Russian composer who died recently, but she was blackballed in the Soviet Union, and she was told by, the authorities within the music world, you need to write acceptable stuff. It's a bit like, highly realistic work in a Marxist context, where an abstract painter is not going to be popular because you're not serving the cause. And she was told, write music that fits with what the party thinks should happen and you'll be a success. She didn't do that. And she was frequently excluded. Her work was experimental, was profound. And one of the people who respected her greatly was Shostakovich, the great composer. And he said to her, my advice to you is that you continue composing along your incorrect line. Because she had been accused of incorrectness, politically and socially. But one of the greatest artists says, continue on your incorrect line. And that's the front line. No, it's a fascinating illustration of the same principle.